Hello, and welcome to Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. On this week's episode, we're featuring a get to know you interview with our newest team member at Heritage Mississauga, Justine Lyn, who is joining us as a Heritage Resources Assistant. Justine is a passionate advocate for history, heritage, culture, and the city of Mississauga, and we certainly look forward to getting to know her and to working with her at Heritage Mississauga.
So joining us this week on Ask a Historian is someone who is new to Heritage Mississauga. And it's not often in the history of our organization we have an opportunity to welcome a new team member. And that's what we're doing today. This is Justine Lyn, who is the Heritage Resources Assistant at Heritage Mississauga, newly started on her second day at work, and a new member of our team at Heritage Mississauga. Not new to us. We've known Justine for a number of years, but here at Ask a Historian, we're going to introduce Justine to you and learn all about the things that make her tick from a history perspective, and what drew her into this field and keeps her captive. So thank you, Justine, and welcome aboard at Heritage Mississauga.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about you. How is it that where are you from? How did you get interested in history, and what keeps you interested in history?
So I'm born and raised in Mississauga. I'm from North Mississauga, Meadowvale area. And I love the city always. And I guess it was in these humble beginnings, if you will, that I really became interested in history. I was one of those weird kids that I would, like, my parents, well, mostly my dad, I should say, he was really the one that got me into history, and he would actually tell me, like, for my bedtime stories, they were always history stories. So because we're nerds like that. So I have like very, very vivid memories of of me saying, like, oh, tell me another story, and him telling me all these like wartime stories, because like my grandmother lived through the Blitz in Britain, and she remembered that pretty vividly, and so I was always really interested in that kind of history. I'm like, wow, I can't believe that you lived through that, and what were we doing in Canada here? Things like that were kind of always, like, I was always asking questions and really interested in that way. So so then kind of like fast forward to like school, history was always my favorite subject, predictably. And so then when it was time for me to go to university, I went to UTM, University of Toronto Mississauga campus, taking history, and of course, and I remember it was and I lived in residence for first year, and just for kind of the experience. And I remember that it was at that point in time, I had a bad day. I don't know what exactly it was, but I had a bad day. So my mom was saying, well, why don't I come and we can go and have like a girls' day, right? We'll do whatever you want. So, what do you want to do? And so I said to her, and I don't know why I said this. To this day, I have no idea where this came from, but I said, I want to go to Benary's Historic House. And the reason why is because, well, I think anyways, the reason why is because when I was a kid, I went to history camp. Yes, history camp, because I'm a nerd. And I went there, and so we were always at Bradley Museum. And but then every Friday we would walk to Benary's, and it was this really, like, and you come through the trees, and it's this big house, and it was like, wow, what is this? But it was always this almost, not like this special, almost secretive type thing. I don't know the exact way to say it, but because we would only ever do it once, right? We weren't normally stationed there. So I guess that's maybe where it came from, but I don't really know why that day I wanted to do that, but I did. So we went over and we had a tour with Richard, who Matthew, and it was kind of funny because he's going through, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this. Like, this was Naomi's room. He's like, you should be doing the tour. Like, you know, you have to come back. You have to volunteer with us. And at the time we were doing Maple Magic, many people might know Maple Magic being like the Maple Syrup Festival that happens in March at Museums of Mississauga. So, and they have a whole bunch of like student volunteers and stuff. So I went and I did that, and they were kind of, and then I was stationed at one point in the parlor, and you know, and here I am talking about all the history and this and that, and so the staff were kind of like, you had to come back, like, you know. So it's like, you know, we can't put you on beanbag toss or something. Like, we have to give you something really interesting to do, and so then that's when I kind of got in touch with Steffi and Tracy, who run the collections department there. And so I started volunteering there in 2015. And then I got my first position working in collections in 2017. And in the same year, I also began working as a tour guide, historical interpreter. So I was doing that. I worked in a bunch of other museums, like, well, I shouldn't say bunch, but like Warley Region Museum, they're great there. You know, I did my internship at Guelph Museums, they're amazing. But, you know, something was kind of always drawing me back to Mississauga. And so, you know, that was kind of around the time when I became involved with the Orlinsky Museum, or the longer name, the Museum and Archives of the Polish Armed Forces. It's a long name, but
so Orlinsky Museum, we'll use that.
We affectionately call it the Orlinsky Museum, after its patron, Colonel Bogusław Orlinsky, and that is in Clarkson as well. A lot of people don't know about this, so it's kind of a hidden gem, if you will.
It truly is.
It really is, yeah. It's in the lower level of the Wawila retirement home. It's a Polish retirement home, well, for all people, I should say. And they long ago, they had a lot of veterans living there of the Second World War. I mean, like Orlinsky, he fought the First World War, the Polish Soviet War, World War II. Like, he continued, and then he moved to Canada and was like doing like test pilot stuff and all the, like, he was such an interesting person, and he lived right in Mississauga. And I'm thinking, how do I not know that these people? And it was so interesting to me. And anyway, so I became involved doing that. So, you know, I was running their social media, doing their exhibits, things like that. Yeah, and so that's also where people might have seen me as well from, because I did a previous Ask a Historian with them.
We didn't know, this wasn't a plan. We didn't know where the paths would merge. I mean, that was quite some time ago too.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because all throughout this time, like, you know, Matthew and I, we always were crossing paths, you know, because if I had research inquiries for, you know, Museums of Mississauga, I was running them past Matthew and stuff. So there was always, you know, we were always kind of crossing paths, if you will. And then I was doing heritage presentations with Heritage Mississauga as well. So
just before COVID, we got that rolling.
Yeah. and there's so many interesting things, like just thinking about you know, like one of my favorite ones was about, you know, the kind of murder and mayhem, crime and deviance in Mississauga. I just thought that was so interesting. And like places that I know about, like I'm like walking down the street, I'm like, whoa, that happened there, or whoa, there was like, I don't know, a fire that happened there, and you know, all these different things, like, there is really interesting. So I don't know, I just find it really cool to, I guess, learn more about the city that you live in, and really appreciate, you know, its past, its present, and you know, and where it's going in the future. So yeah, so that's kind of, I guess, a bit of rambling about.
I always find it's a valuable part. You just mentioned where we're going and the idea of the future growth of the city. And I always think it's a valuable part of the conversation to have those that are engaged with the stories and the history of the place being part of that conversation. So kudos to you. I mean, that's an important part coming forward as a young professional from this place, of this place, knowing some of the stories of this place, being part of that conversation about where we're going. And I think you bring a valuable insight into that and your perspective. So can you tell me a little bit about some of the experiences you've had on this road that you have been on to becoming a heritage professional, whether it being museums have always drawn you. I know you've worked in collections. I know you've done inquiries and research projects and exhibits. And so can you just highlight a few things? I'm sure we can't touch on everything, but highlight some of the things that you're most proud of, what you've been engaged with over the road so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of interesting. Like, I don't know, I think a lot of the things that I'm, I guess, proud of are just these like little, I don't know, these like little nerdy like tidbits of different things. Like, I don't know, even when I would be working with Museums of Mississauga, we do a lot of artifact research on different pieces, and like just being able to, you know, take like a spoon and then you're looking at the backside and you're like, oh, look at all these you know, markings, and then I would be going and I'd be able to see who made it, what city they were from, what year, what month they made it in, and like things like that. I'm like, you know, afterwards I'm like, woo, yes, I did it. Like, you know, like those were kind of some really fun points. And I mean, that's very overly nerdy, but and I don't know, and just I guess like learning all these little tidbits about, you know, like the people that lived in the houses, and getting to meet, like one of my favorite things was really getting to meet people in the community who would come for tours, and they would have so many, you know, experiences of their own. Like I remember this this one lady that came in one time, and we have like a wicker chair in one of the historic houses, and she was saying, oh my goodness, like my grandparents made wicker chairs exactly like this back in Pakistan, and you know, and this reminds me of my childhood, and she's going on and telling me about this, and I was like, wow, you know, I just find it so interesting how there's these little things, and they just, you know, and they just remind I know, like it brings, it's like a human element. Like it's not just words on a page or like a dusty textbook, you know what I mean? Like it's about people's experiences, if you will. And yeah, like another kind of funny story that I'm just remembering on that topic was like I took my dad to Bradley House, and we have a wash basin, and it's so, you know, that you would sit in and like pour the water over you, and like my dad goes and he says, I had the exact same one, and I'm like, Dad, that's from 1830s, what are you doing? But you know, because but back in England, it's like, you know, he remembers his mom had the wash basin on top, and he was like telling me exactly like, oh, and it was here and it was here, and this is what she was doing, and you know, and it's really and then other people on the tour were saying, oh yeah, I remember something like this too, and you know, and everyone is kind of, I guess, I don't know, do you know what I'm saying? Like it's kind of this human story, and it's all this coming together, and it doesn't matter where you are from, or you know, or what you do, and but people just, they just connect in this really interesting way. So, and that's kind of, I guess, what you know, your dream is, your hope is when you do history and you talk about history, is like you get that human element of it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, making the connections, right? That you used the word connect, and I think that's the biggest key is making the connections, whether it's an artifact, whether it's a story, whether it's an image. It can be an image from yesterday. It can be an image from 100 years ago. It's, you know, as community historians, heritage professionals, you know, we sometimes view the landscape a little differently than the average citizen does. You know, we see things of reminders of what was there, or a historic building that is now in the midst of the subdivision thing. They can be part of that storytelling, and you know, we can aid, and you can aid in people trying to understand a little bit more about the story of the place in which they live, and then through that connecting to them, and them connecting even stronger to the place in which they call home. And it's a neat synergy when it happens, and I think you're bang on in terms of making those connections and how important that is. Now you've done exhibits, and I know you've done events in the past through the museums and others, and out there in the public and public speaking and the like. But you had some exhibits that you've worked on as well. Do you want to highlight some of the things that people might have seen your work out there, or maybe pre-COVID times?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I did a couple of exhibits at Museums of Mississauga, because normally when I was doing the collections, like contract positions, each position I would have to do like one exhibit in the summertime. So we like rotate some of our exhibits in the historic house. So in Benares, I did the early Black settlers in at Cherry Hill exhibit that highlighted, like, because we know, well, I shouldn't assume that people know, but like the Silverthorns are a pretty big family in Mississauga. The Cherry Hill house and everything, and excuse me, it was always something that I was really interested, like a family that I was really interested about. They have connections to the Chisholm family in Oakville and things like this. So anyways, but then, they did actually have some Black servants who were early settlers in the area, and were very much like pioneers of their time. And so, and they're oftentimes not really discussed very often. So, can we bring light on these people and what their daily life was like? And the interesting thing is that, so before, there's an archaeological dig that was done in the 70s, and so we have a lot of the archaeological pieces from that dig, and it's everything from like teacups, saucers, jugs, children's toys, and we don't often get a chance to exhibit those items that often, but but it's really interesting stuff. And so we were kind of asking, like, who do you think used these things, right? Because if we do find something in the ground, sometimes you don't know what's the context behind this, like what did this mean to someone. So it's this kind of, and I can't really answer that for you, right? So you're getting people to kind of just really think deeply about what these objects mean. And then I also did another exhibit about colonization India, and this kind of came out of the fact that there was at Benares. So Benares is the British, like the colonial name for Varanasi, so in India. And so a lot of South Asian families would come and would be like, oh, I was born in Benares, I was born in Varanasi, was this owned by an Indian family? And I'm saying, oh, well, no, it wasn't, but this is why it's called that. This is the history behind that. And so I wanted to talk a bit more about those colonial connections, and and not like sugarcoating it in a way, right? And showing how also, once again, connecting to the artifacts and how each, like it's all around you. That history of colonization is all around you if you kind of pay attention, like, down to, there's salt and pepper shakers with like, Shiva on them. Why is that? Like, so there's all these different things. So it was kind of, it was an exhibit that went all around the house, and and highlight all these different things, and the family's involvement in that time period. So yeah, so that was really some ones that I'm very proud of and are very interesting, and they were kind of my babies, if you will. So those were some very fun things that I was able to.
And like I said, there'll be new ways coming forward through your time here with Heritage Mississauga for people to engage in these kind of thought patterns and exhibit ideas and the like. And we'll see what that future path is when COVID allows. But it must be a fascinating time. Maybe I'll date myself with this. I'm an older generation historian. It must be a fascinating time for you coming up in the education world, the path that you've been in the recent years, with this evolving conceptions around and understandings around colonialism, around Indigenous matters and Black Lives Matter movements, and like to understand that the museums and cultural organizations, heritage organizations, arts organizations, we all have a role to play in this evolving landscape, and an important one. But this must be a fascinating world to step into now, because you're in the midst of this cultural change internally in established organizations, as well as they come to terms with what these things mean and how to program around them.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I always kind of think of it in the sense of, I mean, I feel like in a way I was always like in that world, because like my mom's family is very British Canadian, and we can trace them back to the 15th century kind of thing. Whereas my dad's family, they're Chinese Jamaican, and so we can't trace them back past my great grandfather. And why is that? And and there's not there's literally books written on people from my mom's side of the family, and there's nothing on my dad's side of the family. And it's and so there's a lot of talk about this historiography, I guess, and how and kind of touching on what I was talking about with the Cherry Hill exhibit. It's it's rarely discussed, it's rarely talked about, and why is that, and what are kind of the barriers behind that, in a way. And that's something that's being talked about very actively in history departments, in universities, in the hallways even. A lot of these discussions happen with my peers, and just trying to shed more light on certain things, I guess you can say. So yeah, so I don't know, it's a very interesting time, I think, to be coming into this field. And we're seeing some of the gaps in knowledge, and and I think Matthew is you're a good example of someone who's trying to uncover those hidden little areas that are not talked about, that are rarely talked about, and kind of bring them to light. And so yeah, so I just think it's really interesting, I guess, time and place to be, if you will. So yeah.
I'm reminded of something, and I've had this in the back of my head for some time, but there's a story was, always remember who's telling the history and whose history is being told. Those are two different things, but at the same time, they go hand in hand. So who's telling the history and whose history is being told? But we have a responsibility and an opportunity to be a voice in history, and I'm looking forward to hearing your voice as we continue this road that we're on of reevaluating, reinterpreting our long-held notions, our long-held stories, of trying to address those gaps, because there are absolute gaps. There's gaps in our knowledge, there's gaps in our records, and that's not just internally to our organization or our city, but in our culture. And the fact that you can trace your father's side back to your great grandfather, I think you said, or your grandfather. There's probably families who can't do that, and so we highlighting those stories is an invaluable part of our task, our responsibility, and our wish, but also encouraging people whose stories have not been collected to reach out and share with us and speak with us, and help us become part of that collection process as well, in terms of gathering information. I think that'll be a valuable part, because will be the nature of our work collectively is so broad. You know, oral histories and exhibits and events and programs and presentations and articles and all kinds of things. And so I'm encouraged to see your voice shine in this process as well, as you get your feet wet and you get your legs under you in terms of working in the city. And I look forward to seeing where it takes you. So.
Yeah. Me too.
so on that, I just welcome to Heritage Mississauga, and people who haven't met you yet, they'll have an opportunity to do so. And again, we look forward to seeing where the stories take us and where you take the stories. And so, thank you, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending some time with us here at Ask a Historian. And thank you to our newest team member at Heritage Mississauga, Justine Lyn, for joining us and sharing some of her passions with us and the path that's brought her to working at Heritage Mississauga. Keep those questions coming, and we'll enjoy and explore the fascinating stories of the city of Mississauga together each and every week here at Ask a Historian.